My name is Jamie Rondeau. I'm a student at the Urban Aboriginal Alternative High School in Ottawa, Ontario. Growing up, I knew nothing about my ancestry. It wasn't until I moved to Ottawa 7 years ago that I began to learn and comprehend the history of my people. I've learned a lot at my high school about traditions and ceremonies of not only my people, but many others across Canada. I've even participated in a few, but it's not the history I would like to discuss today. In all the courses I've taken, it is rare to hear what Aboriginals are like today. It's rare to hear of the issues that affect everyone, including youth-specific issues. It is only in rare cases where one voice is heard to bring attention to education, health, and financial crises, and it generally has to become a crisis in order to be newsworthy. In 2006, the Statistics Canada census recognized that there were 1,172,785 people who identified as Aboriginal living in Canada. Of this number, around 400,000 people had not earned a certificate, diploma, or degree, and fewer than 119,000 people had anything higher than a college or CEGEP degree. Not only is our mainstream education system raising fewer scholars, but fewer and fewer Aboriginals have their ancestors' language and/or traditions memorized. As is common knowledge among Aboriginals, residential schools led to the initial decline of Aboriginal culture. Customs, traditions, stories, and languages were lost with many people, but today there are people trying to spread what they remember around to other nations. Most youth living on reservation learn these things. The problem is, more than half the Aboriginal population live in urban areas.
Youth today are becoming more aware of some of the traditional customs because of the fact that we have initially started to expose the value of our tradition, customs, practices, and beliefs, and encouraging individual youth to recognize the language. Once you have that language, you really and truly become aware of what your culture is and how important that culture is.
Well, I know a bit, but I would like to know more about my culture. Sometimes I smudge to pray. I'm OG Cree from Island Lake, Manitoba. Growing up in Winnipeg, there's a lot of gangs and mostly targets young Aboriginals.
How do I feel about living on the reserve? Well, I lived on the reserve for about 18, 19 years. There's some positive things about the reserve, but there are also some negative things about the community. Where I grew up was Shishagwaning First Nation, which is located on Manitoulin Island. It was a very small community of about 400 people. And basically all we had on our reserve were our homes and the health center and the band office. And we had a small little store that got started about when I was about probably in my 20s. Or no, about 18 maybe when it started. So we never had really anything on the reserve except those things. But some of the positive things about living on the community is that you know, you get to know your culture. You get to practice your culture, like sweats and ceremonies, and you grow up with people that know who you are, and you get to learn from each other.
I cannot speak for the rural, or meaning the reserves in Canada, but I find that close to, if not from the latest statistical data, that there's close to 51% of the entire Aboriginal population in Canada are urbanized. So I find that there are a number of people that are turning and recognizing about the traditional customs. There's a high number of urban Aboriginal people turning to the traditional customs. And I'm not condoning or criticizing the rural, meaning reservations or not, but I do know that it's very limited in terms of what resources, even though they do have the mature aged resources in the reservations to be able to access some of those old customs and those stories. Those are an important part. But I find today that our youth are starting to work towards that area, and that's what makes it most important for me to feel within that we as people in the era of my age, that the youth are taking up a recognition to that importance of our traditional customs. I actually had an opportunity to allow our youngest son, who is 8 years of age, to become aware of that first medicine that comes out, which is the maple water. And we spent a week during his school break to help him understand what it is by tapping that first maple tree and getting that first water. That is a good body cleansing medicine, and these are some of the areas that we hope that our youth would become aware of, what medicines and plants that are and will be grown throughout certain times of the year. So when people become aware of when these medicines become available, because they are only available at certain times of the year, they only grow. And this is where and how it is to be very important to know when these medicines become available, so that you could take them at an appropriate time, or know how to treat and take care and prolong the use of these medicines.
But some of the negative things that happen in the communities, of course, like everywhere else, the drugs and the alcohol, which has definitely destroyed our people all across the country, and still today continues to have a major effect on our people. My community, like, the only people that had jobs were the people that were working at the health center and the people that were working at the band office. Other than that, you know, there wasn't a lot of jobs to go around, so that's why I left. I left to go to school, and then once I was finished my school, I went back to the community for a short period of time, and then I realized that it wasn't the place for me, and I had to go somewhere else where I could get into the field that I wanted to practice in, that's being a teacher. And that's how I ended up in Ottawa. Yeah.
From my short-lived experience on the reserve, living in the reserve, being brought up on the reserve, and being a band member of a reservation, there is a bit more freedom. There's not as many policies and restrictions compared to what the city may have. But then again, it's like individually we are trying to have parents and people become aware of safety issues relating to various areas of concern for all people, especially children and youth, and to women. These are very important, I find, in today's society, no matter whether you're on a reservation or in an urban setting.
A long time ago, our cultures were very much an oral tradition. And what used to happen, I found, is that when the elders would pass away, then a lot of their knowledge and their traditions and their stories would be gone and were lost. So now that, you know, with the media and the access of these stories being passed down in the way of media are more accessible, so when elders pass away, then those stories are not lost. So our children are able to learn those things in a way of media or through videos or through, you know, different accesses. But yeah, I think it's important, especially music. You know, that's something that could be practiced so much in our communities, and especially in the urban communities. You know, you're starting to see more native gatherings happening, where children, if like a long time ago, they never saw those kids. They didn't even know what a powwow was, right? They never knew what a native gathering was, but you're starting to see that. So by exposing our music more and by having young people more involved with that, it gets that tradition, those traditions out there in modern society, so people understand what it's all about. It's not just listening to a drum, well, understanding what that means, understanding what the dances mean, understanding what the tradition is all about.
The mature-aged Ojibwe that showed our youngest son how to tap that tree. He had indicated long ago that there was an Aboriginal Ojibwe man who was tossing an axe, a tomahawk. And in the practicing of that, he had struck a tree. And he had noticed that this tree was what he called bleeding. And he went running to his wife and he had said, come and see this. And so they all looked at it and they thought, wow, this is clear. And they had indicated, you taste it. No, you taste it. So the woman tasted that water and it was very sweet. So they began to say, well, let's start looking at this way of preserving, and they learned how to tap these trees. It is a very long process from tapping those trees, not only knowing what trees to tap and to boil, and the process of it, we collected on the first day 100 gallons of maple water, and it took, I was there for throughout the 4 days and right up to making the actual maple syrup. And boy, is it worth all to learn about that. But to learn the stories about how that came about was very important to me, not only me, but to that young boy.
Some of the struggles that I see that Aboriginal people really struggle with is just their identity, finding out who they are and knowing who they are, especially if they were raised on a reserve, or they may have been raised in an urban community. They know they're Aboriginal, but they don't really have that connection to their ancestors, and they don't know their culture or they don't know their language. They just know that they're Aboriginal, but they don't really understand what does that really mean. You know, sometimes they're not even aware of some of their rights as Aboriginal people. They're not even aware that, you know, there's funding available to you for schooling or whatever, or if you're status or you're non-status. You know, there's so many different areas there that has a major impact on Aboriginal people. But Aboriginal people definitely struggle with, you know, drugs and alcohol. It's been a big area. Residential school has had a major impact on our people and still continues today, having an impact on them. Poverty is another one, you know, like our people are struggling financially, and you see that in our communities. It's not just the people, but it's the reserves as well. You know, some reserves have to have a third-party management come in to kind of take control of what's going on, because they're in such a big deficit, and you know, your communities can't function when they're in that kind of state, which makes it really hard. Oh, I've been at the Urban Aboriginal School for 8 years. The reason why I like working here is just because when I went into the teaching field, that was one of my goals, was to work with Aboriginal students. And the reason why I like it so much is that I'm making a difference, and I'm trying to be a role model for the students as much as I possibly can, and just showing them that yeah, I've had struggles just like most of them have, but hey, I've done something with myself and I've made a difference, and I'm making a difference today by influencing them and showing them that yeah, you know, we can survive in the urban communities, and we can make a difference, and that's why it's something that I enjoy working with the students, just because they all have positive things to work towards, and that the future is there in front of them, and sometimes they don't see that. And by allowing them or showing them that yeah, you are smart and you can get through this, and that, you know, this is just the first step, and there's many other steps and opportunities just waiting for you, and you just can't give up because, you know, you're dealing with some negativity in your home.